Today's breaking story bears the headline, Mike Pence reveals 4 reasons he's not backing Donald Trump. And in today's report, I'll share why the ultra-conservative former VP is breaking with the party and not standing by his man. There are very few Republicans who will be intellectually honest about Donald Trump because if they still have aspirations of higher offices, they will sell their conservative souls to gain his favoritism and access to the purse strings he controls. That's why you see the head-scratching reversals by people like J.D. Vance and Nikki Haley, who will slide between Team Never Trump and kissing the ring. But Mike Pence is different because he's retired as a politician and now gets to write books and speak freely on interview shows, including today's unfiltered utterance that rejects Donald Trump's candidacy that you're going to want to hear. The former vice president will be best remembered as the guy who got thrown under the Trump bus after the January 6th insurrection.
No, you heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean, he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
We're saying hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
Pence was a recent guest on something called the Indiana 250 Off the Record podcast, where he checked off the reasons he will not endorse Donald Trump. And before I share the juiciest ones, I want to share this clip because he accidentally reveals the nature of the Trump MAGA voter, who is high on emotion and easily influenced by Trump's victim and they're out to get you rhetoric.
I'll never forget a farmer that came up to me after a town hall in Iowa, and he said, Mr. Vice President, he said, you did real good. He said, you're going to make a great president someday. And I said, well, thank you. I said, can I have your support in the caucus? And he said, no, I got to be for Trump this time. I said, do you mind telling me why? And he said, understandably, he said, well, if they can do that to the former president, they can do that to me.
The number one reason Pence won't endorse Trump is coming up in a few seconds, but first let's look at another reason as Pence calls out Trump for his dismantling of Republican values and even works current VP nominee J.D. Vance into the criticism.
I see President Trump leading our party away from many of the policies that we governed on for 4 years. I mean, we believed in a strong defense and a robust foreign policy. We directed our military to take down the ISIS caliphate and their leader. We took out Qasem Soleimani. We sent cruise missiles not once but twice into Syria when they used chemical weapons on their own people. But I see the president and some of his most ardent supporters, including his running mate, who now advocate a more of an isolationist view, which is not my view of the proper role of the United States or the Republican Party.
And another reason he won't endorse Trump is because of his fiscal irresponsibility.
I believe the national debt represents one of the greatest threats to the vitality of our country. And I see my party and our standard bearer walking away from dealing with the national debt, even being willing to talk about entitlement reform.
And what is the number one reason Republican Mike Pence won't endorse Republican Donald Trump? Please buckle up as we circle back to that dark day. Pence said he cannot offer his endorsement because the former president has not changed his view of my constitutional duties on January 6th. Have a listen.
There's almost no idea more un-American than the idea that any one person could choose who would be the American president. The presidency belongs to the American people. And I'd made that point, and it had not gone well between us. And I went back to my office down the hall from the Oval Office, and I remember I walked past my staff that were all interested in how the conversation is going. I don't think I said a word to them, and I just closed the door. But also some of these other issues, I came to the conclusion that I would not be endorsing.
So there you have it. Mike Pence has his own never-forget moment. He worked for Trump for 4 years and is a lifelong loyal Republican, but there's part of him that is so appalled by Trump he won't toe the line and give Trump his endorsement. And there's more to the Pence interview that I want you to hear that recounts that day and what led him to sticking to his guns and ultimately the endorsement rejection. And while you're listening, I want to know what you think of this news. Do you appreciate Republicans like Pence, Liz Cheney, and Mitt Romney who speak out against Trump at the risk of being canceled by their party? Or is it unforgivable that they're Republicans to begin with? I look forward to reading your unfiltered comments.
You mentioned
January 6th, of course, is an important day in American history. How difficult was it to go against President Trump's wishes that day and certify the 2020 election results?
In the early days of December, when I thought properly the irregularities in the election were all being reviewed by courts around the country, there emerged this theory that on the internet that somehow, as vice president in my role as the presiding officer of a joint session of Congress that counted electoral votes, that I had the authority to reject votes by states or to return votes to states. I knew at first blush that it could not have been possible. I mean, as I said, I took a degree in American history, but I focused on the American founding, and I've taken a great interest in the Constitution throughout my adult life. And the founders of this country signed a Declaration of Independence from a king, right? So the very idea that they would have vested unilateral authority in anyone to decide who would be president of the United States was antithetical to the American founding, and I just rejected it out of hand. And the president and I talked from time to time. He would bring it up again and say, some people are saying this. And I said, well, I don't believe that's true. He asked me to talk to some of the outside lawyers that were advising him. I said, I'll be happy to have our team talk to anybody, but I'm telling you, I don't believe I have this authority. As I said, it would be just a couple of days before January 6th that I still hoped he was going to come around, Nate. I'll never forget, I had done a rally in Georgia for the special elections just a couple days before January 6th. And there were objections that were going to be brought on the floor of the Congress. I was going to make sure that those objections were heard, any evidence was brought, and that Congress would have its say on accepting electoral votes as is provided for under the law. But I saw the president that night. I tuned into his rally in Georgia. And I'll never forget, he opened the rally and said something to the effect of, Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And the crowd cheered. And then he said, if he doesn't, I'm not going to like him so much. And then he caught himself. On camera, I'm watching live. He caught himself and he said, no, the one thing is Mike always plays it straight. And I remember I hollered at Karen. I was at the vice president's residence. And I hollered at Karen and I said, I think he's coming around. Because having worked with him for 4 years, I had seen the president on many occasions where he demanded everything. Right? And he would eventually take less. Right? And I knew that leadership style. And I just didn't know if he was just trying to press the thing as far as he could and say that this might be possible and just wanted to see how determined I was and fixed, in my opinion, and then he would relent. And I thought that was happening right before my eyes, but it was not to be. And the next day in the Oval Office on January 5th, we had a very tough conversation. And when people have thanked me over the last 3 years, Nate, I always respond the same way. I'd say God's grace, because I'll never forget walking out of the Oval Office after I'd told the president, not for the last time, but one more time the day before January 6th, that I did not have the authority under the Constitution of the United States to decide what votes to count or not count, what votes to reject or return to states. That my role was ceremonial, that